Okay, I'm going to talk a bit about a modern understanding of conscience now, and just drop in some names, give you a quick summary of basically what they've said and what they thought. And some of them what they think, actually, they're still alive. So, firstly, I'll just give you a bit of a quote from the Vatican Council, Roman Catholic Church, Second Vatican Council, which was that conscience is a law written by God. To obey it is the very dignity of man. According to it, he will be judged. This basically reiterates everything that Aquinas was saying, and really every single biblical approach. That the idea is that conscience is from a supreme authority, and it can speak to an individual's heart. It's this inner sense of right and wrong, and this moral compass which holds a person to their moral duty. And actually, it's not always right in the sense of like what Aquinas was saying with invincible errors, and also with the idea of Butler just being able to blind your conscience. So it's not always going to be telling you the right thing, but if you follow it, you cannot be judged negatively by God, because actually you have a true heart and you have a true conscience, and you've been true to that throughout your whole life. And so even if you get things wrong, if you obey your conscience, you'll be doing the right thing. Okay, Vincent McNamara, he describes conscience as an attitude or an awareness. So you can link it to kind of virtue ethics. He writes that it is not so much that I have a conscience, a special piece of equipment, as that I am a conscience. That is how I am. That is how I find myself. That is a basic truth about life. He's saying that as people, we are rational, morally aware individuals, and actually to describe conscience as maybe like Newman did, as like almost like being on the telephone with God, or as a faculty like what Aquinas is saying, McNamara is saying that this is an approach to life. This is just a secondary quality of being a human, and the idea is that you should take a holistic approach, and that as an individual you are a conscience, you are someone who is moral, and you have a moral compass within you, and that is kind of what characterises us as individuals. Richard Gula, I don't know how you say it, G-U-L-A, Richard Gula says that the conscience is kind of not a series of laws, but it's more of a way of seeing the world. So the conscience is our kind of perception of the world around us and how we should react to that and act within it. This is quite interesting because you could link it to Hare and his idea of prescriptivism, whereby Hare's idea of Blix, like when we're born, we're kind of born with a perception of the world, and I kind of imagine it a bit like, you can get those like glass, multifaceted kind of shapes. Sometimes they're paperweights, and it's almost like you're born on one of these multiple faces, and that is then the way you see the world. And so a religious person has what Hare would term a religious blick, so they see the world through religious eyes, and everything they see they can link to God. This is kind of the idea of when Aquinas' argument about God is revealed through the world. So you're born with a religious blick and you'll see the world in a religious way. Similarly, if you're born in a secular blick, perhaps, then you'll see the world in a secular way. And this is kind of what Gula's saying, in that our conscience is a kind of perception that we have about what is right and what is wrong and the way we should act. You could possibly link it to Wittgenstein and his idea of language games and picture puzzles, with the idea of the hare and the rabbit. And so he drew this thing that looked like a rabbit and a hare at the same time. I'll draw it here just in case you haven't seen it, because you might be thinking a hare, what do you mean? Because actually that could sound kind of crazy. So he drew, it's not very good, okay, right. So he drew this, right, so this way, it's a duck, sorry I forgot. So this way it's a duck because you've got his like beak, and that's his head. But then, kind of, if you imagine it that way, it's sort of like a rabbit, so it's ears, and that's his face. Do you see? Can either be a duck, quack quack, rabbit. So that was Wittgenstein, and he was saying that a lot of the time when we view things, we will view it with one kind of perception. So I initially see the duck, but someone else might initially see a rabbit, and this can be passed on with Goulard's idea of conscience. Now you've got Vernon Rutland, Rutland Ruland, and he is taking a religious approach, a modern religious approach, and he's saying that actually conscience is the interpretation of the voice within us, and this voice has been invoked by God, which is not exclusive to Christians. It can, like all Christian beliefs, it's, is something innate within humanity, and even though it is an echo of God's voice or God invoked, you don't have to be religious to hear it. And actually, we use our religious and moral wisdom to make our moral choices, and often the conscience is that kind of interpretation of that voice within us. So Rutland's saying that it's kind of a balance between rationalism and uncritical divine command theory, in the sense that God is not commanding us or forcing us to act in a certain way, but we're using our logic and our reason to assess how we should act, and that assessment occurs because we have an invoked divine theory within us, divine law within us. Then we have Timothy O'Connell, and he's putting forward another possibly religious approach. And his is a bit like Butler, in the sense that, you know how Butler said we have our basic drives, then we have our self-love and benevolence, and then we have, there was another one, principle of reflection, and then you have the conscience. O'Connell is saying that you have a personal sense of responsibility at the bottom. If you imagine a triangle, and the bottom is the personal sense of responsibility that we have for who we are and what we become. As individuals, we feel responsible for our actions and for what we do in our lives. Then the next level up is this sense of obligation which we feel. And again, this is much like Aquinas' Synderesis rule, in the sense that we seek the good, we search for good things, and we search for the resources which are available to us, which allow us to live in a moral community. And then above this, the final level of conscience, and this is the infallible level, is a judgment, and it must be followed. So what I understand O'Connell to be saying, and it could be wrong, is that our personal sense of responsibility and our obligation to search out the good can sometimes be mistaken. You can, much like Aquinas is saying, you can use wrong reason, you can have the wrong facts, you can, like I said earlier about like narcissism, if you're a narcissistic person, this was with Butler, then your benevolence and self-love will override what the true conscience should say, and it kind of confuses your conscience. And this is the same here, that either of those two levels can have issues with them. But actually the final level, judgment, what you conclude is it's your obligation to follow it, and it's kind of your duty. So it's as important as we can to try and make sure that our sense of obligation and our personal responsibility are as readily and well as informed as possible, to ensure that those levels, the fallible levels of our reasoning, aren't plagued with wrong choices. O'Connell says that our moral value is discovered through the historical exploration of human experience. So when we search out the good, we might, kind of hark back to historical situations and see that, okay, well, when they did this happened, and this was bad, so I'm not going to do that. So, yeah. Daniel Maguire agrees with O'Connell, and he is talking about the idea of when we discern our moral choices, we use more than human reason. In fact, we use personal experience, we use culture, shared experience of the past, our imagination, our humour, the fact that we've lost people or lost ideas or lost hope, all in a way to kind of influence how we make a moral choice. So I've given you a quick overview of five different modern views of conscience. So hopefully you can see some parallels with the more traditional views like Aquinas and Butler.